There's nothing better than when a TV show is amazing from the very start, so here are shows that had the best and worst season ones of all time. I'm still a big fan of the later seasons of Stranger Things, but there's just a certain charm and vibe around that first season that is just unmatched in my opinion. It was really just an amazing premise and unique idea for a show that pulled in everybody from the very start, but at its core it was still a very simple story simply revolving around the mystery of Will Byers. There's kind of just a magical feel of watching all these kids going around this small town trying to investigate this thing that gives everybody nostalgia, because even if you weren't alive in the 80s like I wasn't, the show just kind of takes you back to your childhood, riding around town with your friends, and also adding that supernatural element to it. It was truly an amazing season one. And honestly, it kind of feels like the show was originally only intended to be one season until it became a smash hit. The Clone Wars gives us some of the greatest Star Wars content we've ever seen in our lives. It's probably my second favorite Star Wars movie or TV show, right behind Empire Strikes Back, but the first season is absolutely brutal to get through. Not only is the animation absolutely cringeworthy to get through and just looks absolutely terrible, you can tell there was absolutely no budget for it in the earlier seasons. The stories themselves of all the different episodes are just kind of boring and lackluster in comparison to the greatness we get in later shows. You can kind of tell at the very beginning this was probably just a cash grab trying to cash in on the Star Wars name. Luckily, the show did adapt, the animation became better, the stories became amazing, but this first season is honestly a skip anytime I rewatch it. We all know the tragic ending of Game of Thrones, so it has one of the worst last seasons and last couple episodes of all time, complete disaster. The first season was truly magical. Sean Bean as Ned Stark is just an absolute masterclass of acting in this first season. He's so good as the main character. But I think what's so impressive about the first season of Game of Thrones is it's adapting an absolutely massive book with so many different locations and characters and different storylines, but it ends up being an almost perfect adaptation of the book, barely leaving out anything and transcribing things from the page to the screen so perfectly. And it really just builds up the world and gets the audience so invested in all of these different characters so perfectly to set the show up for the home run that was the later seasons up until season 7 and 8. This might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but the first season of Parks and Rec is nowhere close to any of the other ones in my opinion. It just feels like they were trying to figure it out, and you can tell. And this isn't like abhorrently bad like the first season of Clone Wars or anything, but it just doesn't have that charm and level of humor and writing as the later seasons did. It feels very tonally inconsistent from episode to episode and even scene to scene, and I feel like they were just trying to be a little bit too close to The Office, but also not capturing that humor quite as well. So it just kind of feels like a mess until the very end, but by season 2, obviously they figured it out and it became one of the greatest comedies of all time. It feels like decades ago that The Mandalorian season 1 came out and it was the start of a new live action era for Star Wars TV shows. But this first season was truly just a special season of television, especially in comparison to like season 3 of the show that was an absolute disaster halfway through. This just let us dive into a more personal story in the Star Wars universe, focusing on this one character, Din Djarin, watching him and Grogu go around to these different planets, killing different monsters, doing different missions and bounties. The show wasn't concerned with connecting to all these other elements of the Star Wars universe, which is what they started doing in season 3, and it completely lost the charm of this show. But the first season I will truly love forever. It is just a classic. I know there's a lot of people out there that say Seinfeld is overrated and not funny. I think it's actually a hilarious show, especially the later seasons, and while the first season was only 5 episodes, so it's kind of hard to get a feel, it is definitely the weakest of them all. You can really just tell rewatching it that the dynamic between all the different characters and who's supposed to be who isn't really there. The chemistry is not as good, and it was essentially just a test 5 episodes to see how audiences responded, but going back and watching it after seeing the later seasons of the show, it really just feels like that. It was not a final product almost. Sopranos is kind of unique on this one because while I do think the first season is absolutely perfect and deserves to be on this list, it really has no weak seasons where a lot of these other shows fell off in later ones. But aside from the very first episode that I still think is good, it's just very tonally different from the other ones. This is an absolute banger of a first season. Tony Soprano is one of the greatest TV characters of all time, and he absolutely owns every scene he's in. Put down your pitchforks for a second and let me explain myself, because I'm putting Avatar: The Last Airbender Book 1 Water in the worst season ones of television. Now, it is still an enjoyable and has some very charming moments, and especially the last couple episodes are actually really great, but I don't think anybody would argue that this season comes nowhere close to seasons 2 and 3 of this show. Like, it's not terrible by any means, but it's kind of just mid overall besides a few standout episodes. And in direct comparison to that, I think The Legend of Korra has an amazing season 1. It smartly just takes us a huge time jump into the future, introduces us to all these new characters, the new world that has been built up after Aang. While every season of Legend of Korra does have a very strong villain, it's the strong suit of the entire show, I honestly think Amon is still my favorite. He is just so good and intimidating in that first season and gets you up to speed in this new world so well. And I love the entire mystery that was going on all season around him. It also really helps that right after you watch season 1, you go to season 2 of the show, which is a huge downgrade in quality of just the stories being told, but season 1 is actually great. Now, with True Detective being an anthology show with different stories and an entirely new cast every season, there's obviously going to be a lot of different quality and preferences for different seasons, but I don't think it's crazy to say that True Detective season 1 is easily the best of the show and also one of the greatest seasons of television of all time. They will truly never match this first season. In addition to Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson just being absolutely amazing, they both play their characters perfectly, have great chemistry together. I just love the dynamic between them. The writing of this season is also just 10 times better than any of the other ones, especially season 2 was definitely the weakest. I didn't even care for season 4. I stopped watching it after the first 2 episodes. Like I said though, it's an anthology, stands on its own. So if you've never seen this before, just go and watch season 1. You don't have to see any of the later seasons. It's an amazing show. You'll thank me later. Let me know in the comments your pick for either your favorite season 1 of all time or your least favorite season 1 of all time, and hit subscribe for more.